It's about current planning, current transport, affordable housing, but almost all of the groups are talking about a bigger vision, about 2030 or 2040. There's issues of resourcing of that strategic planning, quite a lot of discussion about the universities and their role, and obviously a number of people thought that particularly Group 5 wanted quite a lot of the activity in the city to move out. Simply, it's how to manage that tiger, I think it was Emma's words, where you've obviously got high growth. So it's the opportunity for everybody else to have an input. What I'd suggest is if each of the group leaders write down the number on their excellent notes, and hopefully they're legible, that Penny and Peter can obviously use those to make a summary. It's not going to be simple, but it'll be helped by the film as well. So it's over to you. What issues in your group do you want to take? And obviously, if we get some input from the group leaders as well, then we can reach some conclusions. So you've got 15 minutes and a bit. Who wants to speak? The mic's erratic.
I'd just like to say something on behalf of some of the young people in Cambridge. I work with them on trying to retrofit houses to make them green, and usually there's an extension involved. And in these cases, they're met with, I would have to say, hostility by the planners. These are people who want to try and stay in the city centre using existing stock and to cycle and walk. And of course, the benefit is that they're upgrading the properties as well. So I would like to make a plea to look for sustainable officers or whatever it is to look carefully at what it is that the planners are aiming at. We've had a 6-month battle to get one through recently, and we finally did prevail. And I think it ought to be a clearer policy. I also think there should be a website where people can make comments about difficulties they've had with the planning system, because there's a lot of constructive criticism that would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Well, I've said this before, I don't think we should be frightened of growth. I should think everybody here lives in a house that was on a field 200 years ago. It's how we manage that growth that's really important. To me, what's really important about Cambridge is the quality of the buildings, but even more so, the green spaces. The English obsession is to live in the English countryside. I don't think we're ever going to get away from that, however much planners may like us to want to live in very high density cities. The British like the countryside. And what defines Cambridge is the fingers of greenery that come right into the heart of the town. The fact that you can be standing at the punts at Mill Lane, about to step into cow poo, and 3 minutes later you're in Marks and Spencer's. I think that the cow poo should be on the City Council coat of arms. The problem is that the city centre is shrinking as the city grows, and we should be taking the qualities of the city centre into the neighbourhoods. The outer areas, the nuder areas, I think have had quite a bit of attention from the planners, but actually most of the existing areas haven't. There's been lots of infill done by builders, not architects, and what's missing is green spaces. The City Council appears to be constantly taking payments from developers instead of making them build new green spaces. On Mill Road, where we live, McLaren's are building hundreds of student flats across the road. The Royal Standard has become student flats. The Labour Club is going to become student flats. No green open space in an area which badly needs it. If there is any, it's Romsey Wreck, and that's already crowded on a sunny day. So my question is, why are the City Council constantly taking cash payments rather than making developers create new open spaces? And finally, to me, in terms of the quality of buildings, I remember doing a tour for architects around the city centre, trying to find a building which hadn't been built by a college, which I thought was a good quality. And we got to Quayside, which I at that time thought had been built by the town rather than a college. And it turned out it had been developed by Maudlin, I think. But at the end of the tour, this guy at the back of the group, who had been very quiet, stepped forward, and he said, "My name's Nicholas Ray, and I designed Quayside. And it's fantastic. If any of you can remember the toilets that used to be there, it provided a public open space by the side of the river, which you'd expect to find in any city like Cambridge in Europe. So I think it was a great development, good quality. He said it's the only opportunity I've had to do anything like that. And he said why? It was because the developer was prepared to go the extra 5%. And to me, the extra 5% is what Cambridge should be going for. If you look at too many developments, Cambridge City Council appears to have been grateful to the developers to give us anything. And actually we should be punching our weight. We should be saying, this is Cambridge, UK, I've been to California, I've been to Beijing, you say I'm from Cambridge and people have heard of it. We should be using that, and we should be making developers give that extra 5% to give us quality builds with attractive surroundings.
I think what we'll include in the notes that are put in is the responses to some of those questions, including that one. So clearly we do have, we are uniquely a city with green fields in the city centre. We cannot create that along Mill Road, but we can look at the neighbourhoods and actually see, well, now that we've got the pressure of population, how do we aim to get the public realm in those locations? Yeah. So we will respond as part of the document that goes up.
If we're talking about planning for the long term, we must take into account the possibility of climate change and the consequences of that climate change. We can't duck that particular issue. What we've got to do is, when planning for the future of the Cambridge sub-region, we've got to build in resilience to make sure that whatever happens, we can cope with it. This area is particularly vulnerable to climate change, and we've got to keep that constantly in mind. And finally, just one quick point on neighbourhoods. It's a point that we did discuss at some length in our group. It's so important now, as the city grows, to establish not exactly self-contained neighbourhoods, but certainly neighbourhoods which are proper neighbourhoods with their own shops and their own local employment. We are tending to build dormitory suburbs, which is bad news.
Okay, thank you. I think we come over to...
A key theme is about long-term strategic planning. And to do that well requires really good communication. Now, councils are not particularly good at communication. That's partly our fault. It's because we don't value it, and therefore we don't fund it properly. It is very time-consuming, it's very expensive, and it requires engagement with a lot of people. And we need to think of people not just in terms of being residents or business or outpatients at a hospital and so on. We are all of those. We just wear different hats at different times. Sometimes we're a cyclist, sometimes we're a motorist, sometimes we're a pedestrian. Sometimes we're a resident, sometimes we're a commuter. And we have to think holistically and in an integrated way that treats every person who's coming into the city, who lives in the city, who's travelling out in the city, as having multiple needs, rather than just thinking in terms of satisfying individual groups, whether it be business or the cycling company and so on. And so consultation has to embrace that. And I think the City is beginning to do some really good things. The workshops are a fantastic attempt to engage local communities in a really constructive way, to tap into local knowledge. And that's something that we need to be doing much more of, but much earlier in the process of developing local plans, whether it be and local strategic transport planning as well. We need to be getting those people in. We need to be getting experts in from within the city, from other cities in Britain, other cities in Europe, and around the world. Let's pull in all of the best information as possible. Let's create an environment like we have here today, and extract from that the best ideas and try and work out all of those really awkward compromises that consultation requires. And that's it's a skill that the councils all have to gear up for.
Hello, I'm Linda and I'm from Abraham Road, which is one of the so-called corridors that's coming into Cambridge. And I want to make a strong plea for a community development approach and community surveys to actually fully understand the impact of these corridors, the development of these corridors on local communities. And particularly, I want the public health implications to be addressed. The pollution effects of air pollution and noise pollution on local people, and and the impacts, particularly on older people, of the changing landscape and amenities around them. And I think we really need to address the free market approach to development that we have at the moment, and the way that property companies are moving into Cambridge and making vast profits and developing Asian-style housing which use very little land and are very high, 3 or 4 stories on the edge of the city, which looks dreadful, to extract more profit. And I think we could take a hint from Sadiq Khan, who's going to have a survey of properties in London and to establish how many of those properties are owned by foreign investors. And we need to look at this in Cambridge. Lastly, I'd like to make a plea about open spaces. I think we do need more open spaces in Cambridge. The ones that are open to the public are getting vastly overused. So my suggestion is that the university, which is benefiting financially from the development of Cambridge, actually opens up its own spaces to local residents. For example, a good example would be the botanical gardens, which are quite expensive to visit, and I think local residents should be able to access areas like the botanical garden free of charge. And I can think of lots of other spaces that Cambridge University owns which could be made open to local residents. Thank you.
Hi, Gavin Shelton. I just wanted to share a thought that I shared with our group earlier, that Cambridge, I think, right now has a really unique opportunity to become the preeminent city in the world that really tackles sustainable development and addresses the sustainable development goals, which we've just globally ratified through the United Nations. We have a lot of the kind of leading thinkers, the leading minds, the leading researchers working in this area, and many of the leading businesses that can help to deliver on the sustainable development goals. So it would be tremendous to think that in 20, 30, 40 years' time, people look at Cambridge as the place in the world that has really typified and exemplified the sustainable development goals that are critical to all of our futures.
Yes, I'll just speak loudly rather than waiting for the microphone. Sorry, Peter Singleton. Picking up on a couple of things. One that Rod Cantrell made a point at our group was about we need to think about the strategic vision. Sometimes there are short-term things we can do quite easily, and sometimes if we think differently. One of the things we discussed, and I don't think Matthew touched on it in the formal summary, before we actually started talking, we got to discussing things like shared taxis, shared Uber, dolmushes in this, about looking at different ways we can bring the vehicles we have into play, and really looking at the experience from other parts of the world, which we might be able to do quite easily, and actually take, even if it's only 5% load off the system, that make all the difference in the short term.
A lot of talk today about the need for a vision for the City of Cambridge. I'd just like to remind you that there is a local plan, and that local plan does incorporate a vision. It may not be a vision that suits everybody, but it sees Cambridge being retained as a compact historic city with a green belt around it and developments beyond that with better transport links between those outlying developments and the city centre. I would also like to remind people here that there is a very good chance indeed that the devolution deal will be pulled off. I see no proper opposition to it, and the consultation has been very positive in favour of devolution. That will mean a regional mayor, a mayor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and that mayor is a person who is likely to have considerably more powers than any single politician in the existing governance structure, that there will be a 30-year time frame at £20 million a year, part of which can be used for leveraging huge sums from private industry if they wish to invest in Cambridge, that there will be £100 million to deal with a part of the housing crisis in Cambridge, 70 millions, there will be 100 millions for general infrastructure improvements throughout the region, and this will give us an opportunity for the reform of governance comprehensively, perhaps the creation of a single authority with the abolition of the county council, which I'd be wholly in favour of. And may I just finish by saying that in all of this, can we please remember that one of the greatest instances in the United Kingdom of disparity is within this city, of inequality within this city and within this region. The disparity between the poorest and the richest in Cambridge is wider than almost anywhere else in the United Kingdom, and the disparity between the wealth of Cambridge and the wealth of Wisbech is also one of the widest in the world.
Thank you, John. The health expectancy of women in East Chesterton compared to Newham is 10 years less. So within the city we have a voice, and we have voices that are not here, but we have some very good voices that are. So finally, Tom.
Thank you. I've got two questions really that have come out of the discussions today. One of them, I'll start by saying I feel like I'm the ambassador for people under the age of 30 in the room. So my first question is, to what extent is the council trying to engage with the future generations? We're talking about a long-term vision, so how are the future residents of Cambridge being engaged? And secondly, from an architectural point of view, to what extent does the local authority view architectural input or design input as a valued asset? We see various competitions happen. I think there's one at the moment for the toilets, a new toilet block work on Sydney Street, or Silver Street, sorry, by Queen's College. And the programme seems to ask for very developed proposals from anybody who's entering to spend a lot of their own time and effort before someone actually gets selected and the project moves forward with any payment. So to what extent does the council really view design as an important aspect in what we're trying to achieve?
I mean, clearly we have a local plan. We want to deliver the local plan because we believe that meets the needs of the next 5 to 10 years. But a number of the issues in terms of vision are not met by the local plan, in the sense that we have to answer where is the growth going to go in the future. The jobs growth is likely to be near Cambridge, but how do we expand the zone whereby we spread that growth benefit far wider in the devolution area that John Hipkin talked about, and how do we connect housing via rail and high quality public transport in that period beyond the local plan. We've clearly got a number of challenges on transport, and I'm sure following up the dialogue and the summary, there'll be further issues to discuss. Yeah, there's a lot of questions, but in terms of design, clearly we have the meld of tradition with new, and we do want to have sparkling new design. So the City Council wants to have both functioning, non-flooding toilets in Silver Street with a design that adds to that part of town, because it's a beautiful part of town. As Antony Carpen would say, we do need to engage younger people in that process. I think in a way, what I would suggest in terms of follow-up from Penny and Peter is there's 4 really vibrant organisations here. Challenge the city, challenge the greater Cambridge area, because South Cambridgeshire is as much part of this now in terms of geography as the city, and let's look at a route to discuss the vision beyond the local plan. But the local plan, in our view, needs to be adopted. We started it in 2010. We want to conclude it sometime next year. There will be a further consultation then, depending on the inspector's outcomes. So it is vital in terms of a number of the interests people have said today that local plan is actually adopted. Including, so mentally we can move on to the next stage. But that doesn't mean focusing growth right near Cambridge, albeit that the jobs growth needs to be accommodated. It means thinking bigger and thinking more into this devolution zone about Mildenhall, about Haverhill, about places that we need to connect far better, because we cannot cope with all the growth that could come to Cambridge. but we want to get the best of it, as a number of the speakers have said. Attracting AstraZeneca to the city is a very good thing for Cambridge for the future, but it's how we make the most of that and how we distribute the impacts of growth. So there's plenty of questions to answer, and obviously we would like to work with the dialogue with the 4 organisations to answer some of those. So thank you for everybody's input, and particularly to our 10, if you could thank our 10 summarisers.